Welcome to the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek along with Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier. Oh, don't you just love that victory feeling? And by the way, as we contemplate the significance of USC's dominant 18-point win over Michigan, let's just stop and realize it's been a long time since we've had a win like this at USC. Not since Notre Dame 2022 has USC won a game as big as this and looked as good as it did on Saturday night. So that's almost 3 years, folks. Almost 3 years without any real high-end win. Because if you go through last year, of course, lost to Penn State, lost the really important games in the schedule, lost to Michigan. 2023 got bombed by Notre Dame, lost to the pig farmer, Bryson Barnes in Utah. Came up short, lost to Oregon. It's been almost 3 blinking years since USC's won one of these. So that kind of underscores how much Lincoln Riley has failed. But now we turn to the present moment in a game that Lincoln Riley and USC absolutely had to have. Well, this is how it's supposed to look. This is how it's supposed to feel. Back to the standard. The standard is the standard is the standard. I've been beating the drum. Didn't earn the benefit of the doubt going in. This is a good step forward. But we'll discuss how much benefit of the doubt USC has really earned back with this win. You might be thinking, hey, what are you going to say about Notre Dame? Like any good football team, we have discipline here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. Sundays are for reviews. Tuesdays are for previews. So as much as you might want us to get that sneak peek Notre Dame, no, that's what Tuesdays are for. In two days from now, you'll get everything you could want on Notre Dame. But tonight it's Michigan and our victorious review show with Ethan and Crash. So with that preamble over, Ethan first, Crash second, your 40,000-foot big picture view, all the takes you want to fire off at the start, and then, of course, we'll deepen our conversation here at the Voice of College Football. Take it away, Ethan.
So I think I need to take this time because I took the time last post-game show about Illinois, and I really ripped into Danton Led. And I put the loss on him, and I said that, I felt like he was the main person responsible for it. And, just kind of said it's time to adjust or I'm really going to be nervous about him moving forward. And I'm going to do the exact opposite this time. I'm going to give him full credit where credit is due. This was a massive, massive, massive adjustment. And he honestly, it feels like he worked magic in a 2-week period. And some of it felt sort of obvious, like watching at home, being frustrated, like wanting them to blitz more at the right times, wanting them to be more aggressive on the defensive line, wanting them to force Bryce Underwood to throw downfield, which he hasn't really done super successfully throughout the year so far. But some of it was quite literally working magic. 0 defensive penalties, none. They had no defensive penalties against Michigan at all. And that has been a big, big issue, obviously, was, defensive penalties abounding. And they had none. There was only 3 penalties the whole game. It was, the unsportsmanlike conduct from Makai Lemon, a holding call on Micah Banuelos, and then another 5-yard penalty that I couldn't find when I was combing through the game. But no defensive penalties, not a single one. So I think that is a big reason to give Danton Lynn credit. He really locked in. The defense really locked in. I think that, they weren't kind of BSing everybody when they said the Illinois game was a kick in the head. I believe it was. Bob Springer says no more food poisoning. Lincoln said it affected more than just Kamari Ramsey. So I think it's possible that, he didn't want to make excuses. He said it wasn't that they're not an excuse-making program. And so he didn't litigate it too much. But, he did mention that a couple extra players were feeling under the weather. Could have affected USC more than we thought, I think. But, not to say they shouldn't have pulled out that Illinois game anyway. But I am just really, really happy with their response, and especially led by Danton Lynn. I'm really happy with his response. And I feel a lot more confident in the defensive leadership. Also want to give a big shout out to Devin Tompkins because he had a big game on the defensive line. And we were talking about how, kind of after that Illinois game, a leader on this defensive line needed to step up and kind of lead this really young and experienced unit forward. and he really came out and did that. So really, really big shout out to him for getting the 2 sacks at the DT position and just playing a great game. And then obviously the offense looked good. They're for real. They came out and proved against Michigan that they're a real physical team. The offensive line played great, no sacks. I think I looked, and last year Miller Moss was hurried 10 times and sacked 4 times. So night and day compared to last year. Obviously, big credit to Zach Hansen there as well, especially given they were missing technically 3 starting offensive linemen if you include DJ Wingfield in there. So big shout out there also. And, Ryan Sayuri was great again, too. So just looked great in all phases of the football. And I think another thing that was really significant to me was just how much this clearly meant to Lincoln Riley, because, he's typically a pretty stone-faced, pretty, doesn't really betray his emotions too often. But every time they panned to him on the sideline, especially in the final moments, he was really fired up, especially for some of those younger non-scholarship players, Sayuri, King Miller, he was getting really fired up. So I think, nobody can say that it doesn't mean anything to Lincoln anymore, because this game obviously meant quite a lot. And I think, even though he kind of dismissed Sharon Moore's comments earlier in the week, I think that he did, those comments did mean something to him, and he went out to prove Sharon Moore wrong. So, and also one last shout out to the fans, because Michigan fans talked all week. They talked in the comments section on our show saying that they thought Michigan fans were going to outnumber USC fans. It was not the case. I knew it wasn't going to be the case, and USC fans came out and proved it. So really great atmosphere in the Coliseum as well. And, I think it's really benefiting USC because, Michigan had a couple of false starts in that game. Making this a real difficult atmosphere for other teams to win in is going to come up big. So USC needs to find a way to continue that as well.
So first thing that really hit my eyes as I was preparing for this earlier today was, how about no penalties from USC? That just alone, just no penalties at all. And I mean, credit to both teams in that regard. Only 3 penalties on Michigan for 31 yards. But still, the fact that there was just no penalties from USC was really something that caught my eye as I was reading. And I was just like, okay, where's that been all year? So I was really happy to see that. Then the other guy I was really happy to just see play well was King Miller. Especially so I was reading up and going over everything from the game last night. It was just to see that he's a walk-on that's just, proved his spot, proved he belongs on this team, and just absolutely goes out and dominates in the wake of Eli Sanders being out and Wayman Jordan getting hurt. Him just going up, making a case that maybe USC has 4 good running backs. I mean, we saw what he did against Missouri State, but that was Missouri State. And then to see what he did against Michigan, which you can argue, at least kind of as things are right now, stands as the definition of big boy football. So to see him just go and just slice that USC or that Michigan defense was really impressive. And I also was impressed just with how the defense played. I thought they had a great performance. I think it was a well-called game by Danton Lynn. And I think that really I was just impressed with how they just, really, I think, I'm not sure if they listened to us or what, but whatever they've been hearing in the news, whatever it was they were working on in practice of these last 2 weeks, they clearly took it to heart. And as a result, I think you saw it on the field and on display. And I think it was just really impressive to see how this team is just responding to that adversity, just from that tough loss that could have easily been a win in Champaign 2 weeks ago. And hopefully, I think based on this, I think they have a really good shot to compete well next upcoming week. So I'm really excited to see them continue to build on the progress of this game. Because I think this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think this is the biggest win of Lincoln Riley's career since he got to USC.
So bigger than anything from 2022.
Well, at least just with the momentum the team has right now. And I mean,
Yep.
I'm not trying to discount that Notre Dame win. That was
No, not at all. Just want to make sure. Yep.
Absolutely. Because I think that this Michigan win, it's showing we can beat a good ranked team and get ourselves back in the CFP race. So I think that this is it's a big win, especially with the trajectory this team's on. Now that they've, really, I think, where they are now.
All right. So, Crash, you mentioned King Miller. Ethan, you've come on this show in the past wearing Los Angeles Kings apparel, but there's a new king in LA. So your thoughts, Ethan, on non-hockey stud King Miller?
Yeah, I mean, it's what a story, right? I mean, he's came into the year as the fourth string quarterback pressed into service. I mean, obviously, you really feel for Wayman Jordan and you really feel for Eli Sanders. Both of them seem like they're going to be out for an extended period of time. And for both of them to get hurt in this game, like if you would have told USC fans before this game that that was going to happen, they would have thought disaster. Like, especially, you know, with how early in the game both of the injuries happened, like you would have thought, like, yikes, has the potential to be real scary for USC. But King Miller came out and he proved that, you know, he deserves a scholarship. And I think that that's the big story here is that, you know, I tweeted this out during the game. I was like, I don't really care how, you know, USC seems to be in $1 trillion of debt, seemingly, at least the academic side of things is. But, you know, wherever they can find the money, if they need to beg, you know, the NIL people, their biggest donors, whatever, they need to put together a scholarship for King Miller. Because, I mean, even just off of that game alone, I mean, they're going to need him to be at his best for the rest of the season. But, like, just, you know, he's a program legend for his performance in this game alone, especially, you know, being a walk-on. So and especially, I mean, you tweeted at me yesterday, too, like, maybe he needs to set up something with the LA Kings. Like, seems like easy NIL, you know, setups with him being a walk-on and his great story. Like, a story like that markets itself. So I think him and Sayuri both, but him especially, like they need to get him on scholarship as soon as possible. And just really proud of him, really proud of, you know, what he proved. And I think he made a lot of people in LA proud, especially being a local LA kid. And yeah, he's a real great story. And I think even Lincoln Riley was really proud of him too. And I also tweeted this out yesterday. I think that him being one of the big heroes of the game in a game like Michigan, and Sayuri also, you know, stepping up and kicking the field goal and making all of his kicks, and being also a walk-on and a backup. Like, I think that says a lot about the current culture of Lincoln Riley's program because, you know, like it still has its issues. Obviously it's not perfect, but I think if, you know, you're that deep, especially there's so many positions where the depth has been so questionable at USC in the past, like the offensive line, especially that's also, there's, you know, you got Killian O'Connor, who is a former walk-on starting at center, and he's obviously hurt now, but he was great before that. And it's so deep, and the defensive line is so deep, so many inexperienced players stepping up. Like, that's a real great sign, I think, for the culture of this program. So, you know, can't say it's perfect, and I've shared my share of criticism about it in the past, but I do think that it's really cool to see some of those players start to materialize for sure.
Okay, a natural follow-up, since we're talking about King Miller, the new king in LA, is, you know, should he have been getting more reps? I mean, and I ask that not to second guess Lincoln Riley, because Eli Sanders and Wayman Jordan were doing a really good job. All right, I want to just get that out there. But fans are going, I ask it in the sense that fans are naturally going to ask the question, right? It's just a natural question to ask. I'm not critical of Lincoln Riley's running back management. I think it's actually been really good so far this season. You know, he balanced Sanders and Jordan. He's not leaning on one guy. That's the main thing I wanted to see, and we've been getting it. So, like, I think Lincoln Riley's been doing a good job with the running back room. But fans are going to ask, well, why wasn't this guy getting more touches? Why wasn't he getting more opportunities? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, I think it just has to go with the depth of the room. Like, I don't think that, you know, for a walk-on, he got plenty of opportunities. I think it's also interesting that they had him return kicks in this game because Mekhi Lemon's been returning kicks for the whole season. It seems like he kind of was factored into the game plan of this game a little bit already anyway, before the injuries happened. So I think, you know, he being a walk-on and, you know, being young like he is, you have to earn your keep, and that's just kind of the nature of it. You know, today's day and age more than ever, like the politics is kept out of football a lot. And you need to, you know, you just put the best players on the field, regardless of what their background is or how old they are or whatever. But I do think there's still a little bit, you know, you have to earn it a little bit more. And I think that like I said, I think that he was going to factor into the game plan of this game a little bit more, regardless of the injury status. So I don't think that it's like a talent evaluation problem. Like, I think Lincoln Riley, you know, said in the post-game interview that King Miller did what he's been doing in practice all year. And, you know, you saw the big runs in the first couple of games. I just think there's a lot of depth and a lot of experience in that room. And obviously, you know, we saw before injury, like Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders were both real studs at the position every game they played in, except for Eli. You know, Eli Sanders had a bit of a tough game against Illinois, but every other game, both of them were just phenomenal. So I think it's just the depth and his status. But, you know, now he gets his opportunity to shine, and he can go out and prove that he's a great running back too.
Yeah, so I think with King Miller, I mean, that is a fair question, but I think you just have to look at the depth of the room. And I mean, but the one thing I do admire about Lincoln Riley with walk-ons is he's not afraid to give them their chance. And I mean, we've listed all the other examples of guys who have just, you know, you just got to stay ready for your chance. Killian O'Connor, Ryan Sayeri, like those two other guys are good examples of guys who, you know, waited their turn and either something happened, like injury happened with the guy in front of them, or they beat someone out for the job and they got their shot. So, and I think with King Miller, I think he could probably get more reps, but you also got to factor in, you already have once he's back full time with Brian Jackson and all that, you already have 3 good running backs on the roster before Miller. And that's not even like, but I think it's just the depth of the room. I think I'd like to see him get to play more, but I also, you know, do have a lot of faith in the other running backs. So I'd love it, but I'm also like not sure exactly how that would play out, just given that, you know, you have 2 very talented and reliable running backs who've, you know, been doing, I think, a pretty good job for most of the year in Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders.
All right, so like running backs just happens to be the thing, because like King Miller was a huge story from last night's game. And so continuing our discussion with running backs, Crash, you mentioned Brian Jackson. Ethan, it was very conspicuous that he got into the game because of something very specific. Talk about that situation and if you think USC is going to face any repercussions from it.
Yeah, so he came into the game kind of as a shock to everybody. I mean, I was watching and I was like, wait, Brian Jackson's playing in the game? Because, you know, he's been out ever since week 1. He's been listed as out he was listed as out ahead of the game on the injury report. So I was, you know, I figured he had no chance of playing. I thought maybe, you know, we'd see a 5th or 6th stringer, but not Brian Jackson. But he came out and played in the second half. And so apparently, according to Lincoln Riley, they got it cleared with the Big Ten office. So I don't think they're going to get fined or anything like that. But it is like a really interesting situation. I've never really seen anything like that happen. Also, to kind of update everyone on his injury, according to Lincoln Riley, he's been dealing with turf toe. So, you know, that kind of explains the sort of longevity of his injury, but also him being able to go out and play. Like, it's a real nasty injury that can, you know, that can become like a really, you know, long, potentially season-ending thing if you don't take care of it. But it's also still his toe. So, you know, if in a really dire, desperate situation, USC was able to call upon him. But yeah, I mean, shout out to him as well. Came in, you know, 5 great carries, had the touchdown. You know, if he can come in, it sounds like, you know, the most recent update that I saw is that Wayman's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, and then Eli Sanders is potentially out for the year. So you're going to need as all hands on deck in terms of the rest of the running back room, if that's true. And so they're going to need Brian Jackson just as much as they're going to need King Miller for sure.
For sure, yeah. It's definitely going to be both those guys are going to have to step up, it seems like, next week. So I'm really excited to see what they can do. And hopefully Jordan can come back. But it seems like Sanders could be done. So it's definitely something that USC is going to really need to rely on that depth in that room, especially. And I think that's one thing that's great about having such a deep room. If guys get injured or have a bad day, someone else can step up and you know, have like a big game themselves and make a case to be like, hey, I should be getting more playing time.
Absolutely. Follow-up question with the altered running back room, you know, with Waymo being out for at least a month, roughly, and Sanders likely out for the season. You know, how do you think this affects the dynamic of the USC offense? And without previewing Notre Dame, let's just kind of keep it within its own parameters. Just since you have a couple prime running backs now unavailable, like, should that alter just on a general conceptual level, not necessarily how many touches, but perhaps fewer handoffs, more screens. The screen game was obviously a big part of USC's offense against Michigan. Should it significantly affect the percentage of handoffs versus short passes, the way these guys are deployed, and also, of course, the balance among them? So a King Miller, Brian Jackson rotation, does it matter who's number one, who's number two, as well as percentage of touches and how those touches are occurring, handoffs versus short passes? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, so I think moving forward the next couple of weeks, especially this next week against Notre Dame, you're going to see King Miller as the RB1 and Brian Jackson, hopefully, if he's healthy, as the RB2, just because I think Brian Jackson is still dealing with that lingering injury, and even if he's quote unquote fully healthy ahead of the game against Notre Dame, I think you kind of are going to you're going to see him ease back into it a little bit, because like I said, turf toe is really nasty, and they kind of try to be really careful with that injury in football. So I think just kind of out of injury necessity, you're going to have to see King Miller get the lion's share of the touches. I think based on how the running game worked in this game, you just kind of, try to stick to the offensive identity you've built thus far, and especially with the offensive line playing as well as they are. I think that you play King Miller and Brian Jackson like you have Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders, at least until it doesn't work. And then if Notre Dame turns out to be a lot better defensively against the run than they looked in the first, kind of portion of the season, then you pivot and, you pivot more to the pass game, hopefully before you're down by any points or too many points. But I think, King Miller proved, not only that he deserves a scholarship and that he deserves to, be a running back who takes the field, but he proved that, the offense can run just as smoothly with him in the lineup as the other two backs. So I think, and that's not a knock on the other two backs at all. That's just all credit to him. So I think, like I said, you just, you at least try to keep that offensive identity, because I think that balance has been really crucial to USC's success this season. And then, like I said, if out of necessity you have to change it, you do. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that's concerned me about King Miller's play to this point to where I think we need to make any dramatic changes.
So I think I agree with you, Ethan, that King Miller should be the RB1, Brian Jackson RB2, given Jackson's kind of questionable injury status and where he's going to kind of be coming up this week. But I think really what they should do is they should just play to the strengths of the team. So I think, I think they should, do what's best in terms of whether they're passing it more, whether they're handing it off, passing it to Miller in the backfield, that sort of thing, tossing it. I think really it should just be playing to the strengths of the running backs that they got, that they're going to likely be relying on this week. So that's how I think really that USC can have the most success, is just figuring out how do we play to the strengths of our guys. So if that does mean you have to pass more, if Miller and Jackson don't quite live up to, aren't quite able to, contribute the same way that Jordan and Sanders were, you go more to passing. But then also I think really it's just, like I said, really it just comes down to how can you just play to the strengths of your football team. That's what I think will allow USC to continue to have success with a prominent Miller Jackson backfield.
All right, now our friend Bob Springer, loyal viewer and listener, has been making a lot of good comments in the chat, as always, when he's here. Thank you, Bob. Bob mentions Wayman Jordan, an outstanding blocker, so you don't have him. So, Ethan, this brings up the point, and then I'll go over to Crash. Are we going to see more 2 tight end sets in the USC offense? To have one tight end in the chip, and maybe another tight end goes out for a short pass, or maybe you just have more. You're just going to have a tight end all the time with your 2 wideouts and a setback in the backfield. In terms of personnel groupings, not having Wayman Jordan and his pass blocking in the equation, how do you think that changes the personnel and what USC and Lincoln Riley should be sending out on the field? And again, this is not a Notre Dame specific thing. People are going to obviously, wonder, what about Notre Dame? We'll save that for Tuesday. But just on a, again, general conceptual level, You don't have Waymo into pass pro. How does that affect the usage of tight ends and the overall personnel groupings? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, so I mean, they've already been using tight ends a lot. I think specifically, though, you could see a little bit more of tight ends lining up in the backfield as if they are back. I mean, you saw that yesterday on one play with Carson Tabaracci coming out, and he's, the third string tight end, and he came out and lined up like he's a back. And I think, Carson Tabaracci's number is in the 20s, so it's potentially confusing for other teams because he looks like a running back, like he's not the tallest tight end you've ever seen, and he's like number 24 or something. So teams could potentially think that he's a running back, and maybe you hand it off to him once or twice in short yardage situations to keep the other team honest, but not give it away entirely every time that it's always going to be a pass play. But so yeah, I think that you could see that for sure. And that Crash talked about playing to the strengths of this team. Like the tight ends are obviously a really deep room, especially when everybody in that room is fully healthy. So that could be part of the calculus as well. But yeah, I think that play with Tabaracci really stood out to me as potentially noteworthy because I think that that's a strategy they could employ.
I absolutely agree, Ethan. I think probably we will see. I would expect USC would probably see more tight end use to block, especially because if you lose someone like Wayman Jordan, who is a great blocker, how do you make up for that? So I think that is one way they can do that, especially with a position like tight end, where you have kind of that dynamic versatility of being able to both catch passes, but also stay back and block. So I think that's definitely a strategy, I think, that I would very much think that USC is going to want to employ going forward, especially with Jordan out for the next 4 to 6 weeks.
All right, so we've gone from personnel groupings to let's now go to play calling. It's like these things flow together. It's like just a series of dominoes. So you don't want to get your running backs beaten up. Like you need to keep them healthy to the extent that you can for November and Nebraska and Iowa, and then of course Oregon and UCLA. But obviously, you can't just be a Johnny One Note. It can't just be Jordan Mailata slinging the ball. But you need to have tight ends to provide chipping and pass protection help. So a lot of different things coming together here. Ethan, in terms of play selection, what do you think's the chess move for Lincoln Riley to use next? Because screen game was the big feature against Michigan. So you're inviting Michigan to attack, and you get them out of position. You make them overcommit. You make them overrush. They get out of their lanes, and you just loft the ball to the side. And you get open space. You get a lot of acreage outside the boundary. So opponents are going to see that, and they might be sitting back. What do you think is the next wrinkle for Lincoln Riley in terms of not just adjusting to not having Sanders and Jordan, but also to defenses saying, oh, that screen game, maybe we need to sit back a little bit. What do you think's the chess move? One suggestion: Jaden Mailata keeping the ball on a read. That might be like the next thing that Lincoln Riley needs to lean into to get defenses constantly guessing off balance. Like Lincoln Riley's been in his bag. It's been back to the usual standard of Lincoln Riley play calling this season. Forget about the other aspects of coaching. His play calling has been on point. It definitely was against Michigan. What do you think is the next chess move for Lincoln Riley? Ethan first, Crash second.
So I think that, we're kind of on the same page about the quarterback running the ball a little bit more. I went in a little bit of a different direction with it, though. I think we could see a little bit more of that Hassan Longstreet package maybe that we saw against Illinois. Because I think that, I was a little bit surprised they didn't use it at all in this game, but they didn't end up needing it because the screen game was just working so well. But I think that, if you want to keep everybody's legs fresh, if you want to get a really elite dynamic runner in the game, he made a couple of difference-making runs against Illinois. So getting him in there to keep the running backs fresh could really work out well. I just think you have to keep defenses honest. So if you're going to employ that play, you gotta have Longstreet hand the ball off, kind of like the Illinois game. He came in, he handed the ball off for one play. People were kind of like, "What the heck? Why was he in there? Did Mailata's helmet come off and we missed it?" And then later in the game, you realize, it was 40 chess because he was setting up the run play later in the game. So you have to have him hand the ball off here and there. You also, maybe have him throw one or two quick, easy passes as well. But I think, his legs are a real talent. And, he showed in the games that he played that he's a real dynamic and even physical runner. So, not anything that's going to risk him getting hurt. But if you can, throw him in there a couple of times to keep the running backs fresh, I think it's a strategy worth considering for sure.
I'd wonder if you more go the Mayava route. And I'm not saying that we won't see Hassan Longstreet again, but I'm just wondering, it seems like if USC wants to give him an extra year, he can only play in one more game. So USC's got to figure out what game would they want to use it. So it's really only something you can kind of use once. So I'm not saying that it won't happen, but I would probably lean more with Matt and say that it might be more, you have Jade Mayava run the ball a bit more. So I think it would be more that. Just not that I don't think it would happen, but Hassan Longstreet, I'm assuming Lincoln Riley wants to preserve a year of eligibility and give him time to develop. Maybe it's something they can use more next year, assuming Mayava doesn't turn pro. But I think it's something that we probably can only really see one more time if USC wants to keep Longstreet's red shirt. So for that reason, I think it might be more Mayava running and not so much of that next wrinkle being strategically implementing Longstreet in once in a while to give the running backs a break.
I think we're going to talk a lot about that particular point, Crash, on Tuesday. Because do you want to use the big gun, Longstreet, against Notre Dame? That's going to be a fascinating question. So you've already teed up something for Tuesday, and that's 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. We're definitely going to be talking about Hassan Longstreet relative to the Notre Dame game on Tuesday here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. All right, we've now slid into the quarterbacks. Like, it's just natural progression, right? Quarterbacks. So Jaden Mayava threw that one really idiotic interception. Just classic. Just take the 3 effing points at a time when USC was up 14. So a field goal has great value. You go up 17. You go up 3 scores. You just have to eat the ball and just take the 3 in that situation. But other than that, man, he continues to deliver. He continues to have such great comfort level, like throwing the seam passes to tight ends. Like, that has been, I think, like the wonderful, unexpected revelation of Jaden Mayava this season. Just threading those 20 to 25-yard passes into tight windows to tight ends. Like, that is NFL level. That's NFL level stuff. And so, Ethan, Crash, your views, your takeaways from another really, really good performance from Jaden Mayava.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the one mistake, and that's obviously, it's a learning experience. I kind of said on Tuesday leading into this game that I felt like, USC's offense wasn't going to play perfect. I thought Michigan's defense was going to play better, full disclosure. I thought that they were going to be the ones creating more of the mistakes, and that opportunistic, supposedly very physical defense was going to cause USC some issues. But I kind of knew this was going to happen, and I tweeted out early in the game when Lake McCree fumbled that the defense needed to pick him up, because those things happen even to great players like McCree and Mayava. Like, they're going to make mistakes. And, McCree especially, he wasn't playing 100%, and he's, been around this program for a long time. Like, he needed his teammates to pick him up there, and they ended up doing it. But I just think, so that Mayava's not perfect. Not even Caleb Williams was perfect. Like, in 2022, Caleb Williams, even he threw interceptions. Like, these things happen. It's not a great, it's not like something that if you're Lincoln Riley, you can just brush off and be like, oh, those things are, you have to correct that and make sure he learns from that and doesn't do that again. He doesn't need to play hero ball in that situation, like you said. But yeah, overall, great performance. He really showed Michigan fans what a real Heisman candidate quarterback looks like. There was a lot of Michigan fans last week who were getting on my case about my evaluation of Bryce Underwood, and I was just like, Bryce Underwood looked like exactly how I thought he was going to look like. Like, I what can I say? You just got to watch the games. Like, that's you just got to. It's and I will give my full respect to Bryce Underwood. Like, I think Michigan is handcuffing him a little bit, to be completely honest with you. I thought that they moved the ball a lot better when they put the ball in his hands than when, they were trying to run the ball, because it very clearly wasn't working, and they still kind of kept going back to the mill. And I, there are a lot of Michigan fans frustrated online that they weren't letting him sling the rock a little bit more. And I was like, yeah, especially with our secondary. But he still obviously can't throw downfield, is not very accurate. But he's young, and he's going to grow, and he's going to get better. Just like Mayava did after last year. Like, he had a lot of potential, and he's really grown into really something. So yeah, just really proud of him, really proud of, him being really fired up, throwing some really good balls. The ball to Mekhi Lemon was beautiful, beautiful catch as well, obviously. And I think another important little note from this game is they really kind of leaned on Jacoby Lane early, which, Jacoby Lane has put up big touchdown numbers in a couple of games, and his chemistry with Mayava at the end of last year especially was really good, but he's like kind of been mostly a red zone threat. And so to see him, being utilized more throughout the length of the field, I think that was really good to see. So, hopefully they can kind of lean on him a little bit too in the coming weeks, especially with the running backs out.
So I think with Mayava, I think he's been super impressive. And obviously, I think it's just mistakes happen. It's only his second interception of the year. So it's not like last year. It was just like where it just seemed like, yeah, I think he's gotten a lot of, he tries to be Superman all the time. And I think it's a term Cody Kessler used a lot. I remember I worked with him last year, is sometimes you got to remember, this is what Kessler said, like either learn when to be Superman and when to be Clark Kent. So I think he's still learning that. I think he's doing a much better job, where last year it's like he's just chucking it. Well, he's throwing it, and you're like, is this either going to be an impressive touchdown pass, or is it getting picked off and run the other way? So it was a lot more like it was just a lot more like you just didn't know what was going to happen. But now it's like he's developed. It's not just his raw talent. You can tell that he's actually really good. And I was super impressed with this game. Obviously, the interception was tough. But like I said, I'm not too stressed over it. And I think just especially how well the entire team played, you didn't have to be perfect. I'm not trying to say he should be throwing an interception, hope to get picked up by his team. But the fact that everyone is playing so good, it didn't end up being too costly, I think. So I think it was really impressive that he was able to, go out there, shake it off, and, keep having a good game even after throwing that pick. So I'm really confident that he's going to keep getting better and keep knowing, like, for the most part, obviously it won't be flawless, but when he's, going to have to, make the big plays, but then also sometimes you just got to, just go down and just not surrender the interception.
All right, folks, we are going to be talking about the defense, but, King Miller really stole the show in this game. That's why we led with him, and that's why we led, of course, with the offense. So we're going to get to the defense in just a bit. Final comment from me before we take our little commercial break in just a bit. King Miller playing well, Jaden Mayava being comfortable, the offense functioning very smoothly. And hey, what a difference a year makes, right? Against Michigan. This time in the fourth quarter, several minutes off the clock, march the ball right down Michigan's throat. Championship drive. That's the evolution of this offense from a year ago when, just needed 2 first downs to win the game in Ann Arbor. Couldn't even get one. What a 180 with this offense. Quarterback looks solid. The pieces fit together. It flows. Not too many mistakes. And so all of this is certainly a credit to Mayava, Miller, Mekhi Lemon, Jacoby Lane. But this is the story not enough people are talking about at USC football. Zach Hanson. Let's give him the respect. Let's put him on a pedestal, at least right now. Maybe he'll be toppled from that pedestal in the coming weeks. But right now, Zach Hanson, not enough is being said, written, printed about him. And all through last year, when I was with Tim Prangley, before I met up with Ethan and Crash, I was saying, we know what great elite offensive line play looks like at USC. Bob Springer, Jeff Rodriguez, and, I miss him dearly. Gary from Dana Point, one of our regulars on the show with Tim a year ago. The old timers, they remember this. Late 1970s, student body right, Anthony Munoz, Brad Buddy, Keith Van Horn, all got all these dudes who win in the first round of the NFL draft, and USC was just cranking them out left and right. Like, we know what great offensive line play looks like. We know what it's supposed to look like at USC. And we did not see that last year with Josh Henson. And that's why I wanted him gone. It's nothing personal. I just want to win football games. I want to win championships. And it was clear that Josh Henson was not up to a championship standard. So he needed to be kicked out. And so Lincoln Riley promotes from within instead of, trying to land a really big fish. And, I needed to be convinced. And some people were saying, don't worry, Zach Hansen's got this. He's good. And I just said, I just need to be convinced, okay? Let's just wait to give him the praise until we really see it. Saturday night, we saw it. Zach Hansen with, and Ethan's mentioned this, no Killian O'Connor, no Elijah Page, and no DJ Wingfield. Like, not getting DJ Wingfield eligible, which we all know is BS. We litigated that in the summer. It's an absolute crock, but it happened. But, I was certainly thinking, USC's O-line might not have enough dudes. Nope, no problem. Zach Hansen's got this. Zach Hansen generates elite performance against, Michigan's good in general, but Michigan hangs its hat on what? Defensive line play. That's supposed to be the absolute cornerstone of Michigan football, and we crushed them at their strongest point. So that is the difference. That's the Zach Hansen difference. And we need a Trojan trumpet fanfare. We need a fanfare for him because he led that conquest of Michigan. He's getting those guys to play, and it's an undermanned group, right? This is not the full strength group. This is not the 5 number ones. This is a mixture of starters and backups. Zach Hansen, he's hitting the Shohei Ohtani 500-foot homer into the Dodger Stadium pavilion. So Zach Hansen, that's the story. Not nearly enough people are talking about, whether within USC or nationally, wrote about him at Trojans Wire on Sunday. So you do want to follow Trojans Wire for written coverage. I made sure to give Zach Hansen his flowers because he absolutely deserves it. It's a big reason USC beat Michigan. It's a big reason USC goes into Notre Dame with everything to play for. Okay, that's my editorial for tonight. Obviously a much happier one than the 15-minute rant I went on after the Illinois game. So we're going to get to defense on the other side of this commercial break. We will see you in a minute here at the Voice of College Football.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And you can listen to Mark Rogers at the Voice of College Football Monday through Saturday, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West. Want to support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football? Go to our YouTube homepage. This is what it looks like. You click on that little join button, and if you join at the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier, you get insider access to our bonus cuts. Ethan, Crash, and myself have created 4 bonus segments. We'll continue to add more as the season goes along, but You only get those if you go to the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. That's how you support the channel. It's how you support our work, Ethan, Crash, and myself at the Voice of College Football. And not only that, but the other way you can support us is you go to vocfb.com/shop. You look at the caps, you look at the shirts with the VOCFB brand and label, and obviously Ethan, once again, modeling that snappy USC camo cap at the Voice of College Football. When you get a USC labeled VOCFB product, that goes to the USC channel as well as the company, so it helps Ethan, Crash, and myself. So obvious ways that you can enjoy something extra, a bonus cut, a nice snappy looking cap or shirt, also coffee mugs and tumblers if you just play around and look at all the inventory on the vocfb.com shop site. And then the other thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and I don't think we're going to get there tonight, but if you want a second hour of our show, you always get one free hour, but a second hour, $150 in super chats. If you want a third hour, we'll be here. We'll stay here. We'll keep the coffee brewing. Another $150 in super chats. Again, doesn't look like it tonight, but that is always there. If you want that second hour, super chats at $150 or how you make that happen to help ourselves, three of us, and the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, advertising and housekeeping are over, so now certainly the defense deserves its due as well. And Ethan started the show by giving D'Anton Lynn his props. A lot of stuff got fixed. A lot of things looked tighter, better. You know, just the lack of attention to detail, the confusion that we recall from the Alex Grinch era, that was dramatically reduced against Michigan. So, Ethan, you obviously gave D'Anton his props. What would you say is the bigger deal here? That, just mistakes got weeded out, or, this is another thing you've been focusing on, Ethan, that there was consistent pressure on the quarterback. Like it was just night and day from Illinois in terms of getting into the backfield, wreaking havoc. Like both were obviously good, but like if you had to pick one of the two, and then I'm going to turn it over to Crash as well, which one stood out for you a little bit more than the other if you had to choose?
So I think it's a tough one. I think I think the discipline is a really big story here, just because it's something that I've been reiterating over and over on the show, is that you can't make these guys a year better in a week or 2 weeks, as they had in this case. But the penalties was just something that really needed to be cleaned up, and it's something that I think D'Anton Lynn is someone who is often discussed, and someone brought it up in the chat as well, as a potential head coaching candidate for high profile jobs. And he, had a lot of success at UCLA and came in and immediately had it at USC. And then, the beginning was just a little bit shaky. And so I think that, him coming in and really having a rebound game after Illinois, and, just kind of showing that he still can effectively coach players and effectively, facilitate so much improvement. Like USC having their best defensive game of the year against Michigan is really, really significant. And especially, their most disciplined game of the year in a game when emotions are running high. And, the Michigan offense has a couple of superstars on the other side of the ball. Like Justice Haynes was a non-factor, and I know he got hurt, but, keeping the guys level-headed, keeping them, feeling like they can stop anybody is also really key. So, and even before Justice Haynes went out, he wasn't really doing too much. So, I think that the culture and the discipline is a really big story. But you obviously also, players came back. Kamari Ramsey and Alex Graham being back is huge. We got our first little small taste of Alex Graham. Didn't make any insanely great plays, but he was back, and Kamari Ramsey was back, and I'm sure that Kamari Ramsey being back makes the rest of the secondary more comfortable as well. And you saw Bishop Fitzgerald make a couple of opportunistic plays again, as he tends to do. Run from them, dread them, but Bishop Fitzgerald interceptions arrive all the same. He's just a very opportunistic player. It seems like he's always in the right place for picking off passes. So, that is obviously huge, and the players responded, and the defensive line especially really stepped up after a rough game. So. It felt like a re-establishing of the identity that USC was kind of hoping to establish, but also with that big added element of discipline. Like throughout the beginning of the year, it was the defensive line is the strength of this team. And then, if the secondary can be scrappy and just kind of hold on, like the USC defense can have success. And that's kind of what happened. Also, big shout out to DeCarlos Nicholson, because I thought he stepped up and played maybe the best game of his USC career. He was really locked down in this game. So, those are kind of my thoughts on that.
So my overall thoughts around the defense was I thought Dan Tinling called a great game. Like play calling was great. Everything was great. Really just took it to Michigan. Obviously just made Bryce Underwood, made Justice Haynes before he went out, just made just the Michigan offense uncomfortable. And that's how you got to play in the Big Ten. As I think USC has learned. I think just the way USC was able to just bully that Michigan O-line and kind of have their way for most of the night, I think is really shows just how much I think they responded well. Obviously, yes, having, key personnel back like Kamari Ramsey back is huge. Alex Grimm getting to see the field again is huge. Just having the right players on the field also certainly is a factor, but I just was really impressed with how this team responded after just what happened against Illinois and just how just they were like, no, we know what. Like they were confident how they could play. And that's what I want to see from this team, especially as the road gets heavy, you start facing some tougher offenses. Like that's how you got to play. That's how you got to play in the Big Ten. You got to take it to them. So I was really just all impressed with how SC just came out, responded, and just was really imposed their will on Michigan's offense.
Now this is not to take anything away from USC and what it did, because we all knew this was a big game, this was a prove it moment, and we saw a really good product, and we're all really happy and thrilled about it for sure. But we do have to ask the question in terms of calibrating just how good USC's defense was this more about USC being great, or was this more about Michigan's limitations? Because we know that Bryce Underwood is just not there. He's just not ready yet. He could blossom into something really special in the fuller course of time. But this is a project, right? This is not a quick fix. This is not an instant success thing for Michigan. He has a long way to go in his evolutionary arc. But was this a case of USC made a freshman quarterback look bad, or was it this freshman quarterback was never ever really going to make dynamic difference-making plays? I think we need to dive into that a little bit. Ethan first, Crash second.
So I am actually going to give more credit to USC only because of the context of the game that they played last year. I mean, USC goes into the Big House playing Alex Orji, who threw for 30 yards. Like Alex Orji, the game plan was as clear to, if you'd never heard of USC and Michigan football and you just looked at the box scores and you had to make a prediction for how the game was going to go, you would have known that they were going to run the football. Like Alex Orji cannot pass. So, Bryce Underwood by comparison is great. And I can understand some of the sunshine pumping that Michigan fans were doing this past week for Bryce Underwood, because compared to a guy like Alex Orji, he looks like an incredible quarterback. And like I said, he's very naturally talented and is going to be a very good football player. And I would put some of the onus on, he's not accurate, and, he's especially seemingly nervous and inefficient in the red zone, which is has been a big issue for Michigan, not just against USC, but against Wisconsin and other teams. So, he's got his limitations, but I do think that, Sharon Moore is a little bit scared to unleash him. So the play calling is really, really conservative. But the USC defense deserves a lot of credit. because, like I said, last year, the game plan was as clear as day, and it didn't matter. And I think a lot of Michigan fans came into this game confident in the Michigan offense because, based on what they saw last year and based on, this national narrative of USC is a soft football team, all Michigan needs to do is win at the line of scrimmage and they're going to win the game. Like, it doesn't matter if Bryce Underwood plays terrible. It doesn't matter if, they can't throw the ball at all. Like, Michigan's going to win this game and they're going to win it easily. So I think that, it's night and day compared to last year, and the defensive line really set the tone first and foremost. And just generally, like, they deserve a lot of credit because, they actually had to deal with someone in Bryce Underwood that compared to Alex Orji kept them honest. Like, he made some good throws. He obviously can make plays with his legs. Like, he's more of a true dual threat guy who has a lot of potential and especially is dangerous. He's dangerous. He's not polished and he's not consistent, but he is dangerous. So, they kept him honest. They kept him nervous. They put a lot of pressure on him. Like I said, I thought the secondary played pretty well, especially to Carlos Nicholson. So I'm going to give more credit to the USC defense, but I do think that, Michigan fans could benefit from being a little bit more realistic about, their offense, and especially moving forward, because, you have to at some point admit that Bryce Underwood is limited, and that, even if he isn't, the play call, you got to pick one lane or the other. Like, either Bryce Underwood is limited or the play calling is really failing him.
So I think it's a bit of both. I think you have to look at that Michigan offense for what it is. And you made a lot of great points, Ethan, about Bryce Underwood. I think he'll one day be a great quarterback. Clearly, I mean, Larry Ellison wouldn't have made that big a bet if he didn't think otherwise to get him to flip from LSU. That's the story. But anyway, once you think about that, I think this Michigan offense is better. But I still think just with where they were, I think part of it is just what that Michigan offense was. That said, though, I thought this USC defense played really well and was super impressive. So I think it's a bit of both, where you got to look at the talent on the Michigan offense versus also the talent on the USC defense. So I think the defense has improved for sure. And I think while Michigan's offense is better, I think USC definitely could see some tougher offenses, like, that are just more versatile, have, more dynamic quarterbacks, tougher O-lines, that teams that, win games in the trenches. But I think for this game, I think it's really, you got to look at both, because the defense was really good, but also I think Michigan is still, they're still developing. Obviously, I think Bryce Underwood, like I said, will be great, but this might just not be their year yet, given everything that's going on. So I think it's really a bit of both to answer the question.
So here's the big follow-up. USC had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. So 2 weeks to prepare for a not that great Michigan offense. And, credit to D'Anton Lynn and all the players for, not looking at that Michigan-Wisconsin film, which, was rough. That was ugly. We talked about it last week. They didn't get overconfident. They went out and did the job. They did the work. Like, they sensed opportunity and pounced on it. That's the way you're supposed to do it. That's the way you're supposed to approach a vulnerable offense. But nevertheless, 2 weeks to prepare for this Michigan offense. They weren't preparing for Anthony Carter or Tyrone Wheatley or Elvis Gerbach or Tom Brady. They were preparing for this iteration of the Michigan offense. So going forward, and again, not focusing on Notre Dame specifically, just more about the general second half of the season, because this is the midway point after week 7. You're not going to have an off week. You're not going to have 2 weeks to prepare for most of your opponents. How sustainable do you think this is, and how much weight should we assign to this performance against Michigan? How much do you think this did move the needle in terms of what's coming up? What's next for USC? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, I do think it moved the needle in a significant manner, just because, the early games were making a lot of USC fans nervous on Saturday, because you had Ohio State going into Illinois and handling business, which USC obviously didn't do. And then, you had UCLA beating Michigan State very handily and not letting Michigan State get on the board when, USC obviously surrendered 31 points to them. So that was making a lot of people really nervous. And I think, also just going back to this national narrative, like, there were a lot of Michigan fans who obviously didn't watch a single game of USC football this year, or did so in very limited capacity, who were just saying that like it was going to be a total wash, and hadn't seen just the great offensive line play and the great defensive line play, and just generally how well USC was playing at the line of scrimmage, save for the defensive line in the Illinois game. So they, I think, went out and proved that there is a proven path to them having defensive success. And I think also the improvement is really important. I think, looking at the rest of the season and looking at the offenses that they face the rest of the season, I don't feel as though any of them have been dramatically consistently better than Michigan has. I mean, there's offenses that are certainly more dangerous. Like Oregon is, Oregon's had their moments for sure, especially early in the year. Dante Moore didn't look great against Indiana, but Indiana was getting near constant pressure on him. Like, can USC sustain that amount of pressure? I'm not sure. They're obviously going to, try to make him uncomfortable. But I don't think Dante Moore got a lot of Heisman hype after beating Penn State, and then Penn State really fell off the map. And that was still like a struggle on the scoreboard. Like, it wasn't like they boat raced Penn State. Like it came down to the wire in Happy Valley. And credit Dante Moore for leading a great drive there at the end, but I don't, it wasn't like he went out and threw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns or anything like that. So I don't know. I think you got Dylan Raiola, who has been playing a lot better as of recently, but is not super consistent. And then, it's kind of the same with the Notre Dame offense. Like they beat up on some cupcake teams, but they're kind of, uneven overall. And then, Nico Iamaleava and that UCLA offense look really, like a completely different team the past couple of weeks. We'll see if they can sustain that, obviously. But I think, the key, continues to be just improving and improving and improving. You can now go, back to the drawing board, back to meetings this week and say, look, we can play a game where we don't commit any penalties on defense, and we can play a game where we hold the number 15 ranked team in the country to 13 points. We can play a team that has a lot of very dangerous players on the offensive side of the ball. Again, not necessarily consistent, because Bryce Underwood has not been consistent, but I think everyone would agree that he's dangerous. And then you had, Justice Haynes, who's the best running back in the country before he got hurt. And then you had, their receivers that, they had the freshman receiver who had a breakout against Wisconsin. His name has slipped my mind right now. But so there are some dangerous players. They're obviously a physical team. They build their identity on playing physically. So I think that, this is a real good win for morale. I think that especially because, like I said, like the Big Ten quarterback play has been a lot worse than everybody thought overall, and especially a lot more inconsistent. So I think you can kind of point to this and say, this is our standard. Let's forget about Illinois. Let's forget about what Luke Altmaier playing pretty well and that offensive line playing pretty well. Like, chalk it up to food poisoning or travel or, fatigue or injuries or whatever you want to chalk it up to. But, it's a new chapter. We've turned over a new leaf, and we can instill confidence in this defense that, like, this is, the standard we wanted to be playing at all year, and we can still improve on this. Like, there was still a big play that they gave up. There's still hopefully a couple more players they can bring back in from injury. Like, this is a new leaf, but it's also not, this is not the ceiling. Like, they can play better than this. So I think that for that reason, it's a significant thing for sure.
So I think it's a significant win. And I mean, as I said earlier, like, I think it's the biggest win of Lincoln Riley's career since he got to USC. And that's just because I think a lot of it is obviously it's Michigan. And I mean, that holds a lot of weight in college football. So just being able to beat a team and playing, beating them in the way that's like they're on how they're defined, how people look at them. Like, they talk about Michigan. You think physicality, you think owning the Big Ten, you think big boy football. When you hear those terms, you think Michigan. Yeah, you think Michigan, Ohio State, like those good teams that are just, their identities are built on physicality. So for USC to kind of come in or to face Michigan and beat them playing Michigan's brand of football, I think that's really big. Obviously, it shows that USC can compete in the Big Ten. And obviously, I think there is just a lot more parity in the Big Ten this year. I mean, it's just been a really fascinating conference to just observe, just casually trying to watch whatever games you can, like before, I head up to LA for the game. But it's just been really interesting to just see all these results that have been coming in across the conference. But I think it just showed this win against Michigan shows that USC has like a path into the playoff. I'm sure there are more great wins that can come. Like, I hope next week, I'm saying again, this game was the biggest win of Lincoln Riley's career. Like, I hope I keep having to correct myself, and am completely fine if that is the case. But I think that for USC, if just by beating Michigan, they've shown like, hey, we're here to play, we're here to stay, we're here to compete. This is our year. So that's why I think this is a really big win, just because it's the message it sends across the Big Ten that USC is here to play and here to stay.
Well, and that leads us into Tuesday. If USC really is here to stay, it's going to go to South Bend and make a statement. So Tuesday night, we're going to preview USC versus Notre Dame. It's a big one, of course. It always is, but like there are significant stakes on the line in this game. We're going to have a special Notre Dame guest. We're going to have a little Q&A. So we're going to spice things up with our Notre Dame preview show. That's Tuesday at 10 Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And you can set aside the Dodger game for 1 hour, all right, for USC Notre Dame, because this is a rivalry which deserves respect. Obviously, the fate of this rivalry long term remains in question. So you do want to set aside time here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football for our Notre Dame preview show Tuesday at 7 in Los Angeles and the rest of the West Coast. Once again, you want to support our channel, you want to support the three of us, go to vocfb.com/shop. Get a nice snappy USC camo VOCFB cap that Ethan's modeling, or get a USC shirt, or get a USC coffee mug or a tumbler or anything else. Just go look through the store online to see what you can get. And of course, our USC YouTube channel memberships, the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier, get these insider bonus cuts. Ethan, myself, and Crash have chopped up 4 of those bonus cuts. So, bring your knife and fork, but you only do that if you join at those middle or top membership tiers. That's another way to support the USC channel. So finally, before signing off, and Bob Springer reminds us, Oregon lost at home. Always a great weekend when USC can beat Michigan and you get an Oregon loss. What a daily double that was on Saturday. So for 1 week, all's well in Trojan land. It's a nice change of pace instead of me, spitting fire and brimstone. I don't have to be bad cop for once. It felt really good. And obviously we'll see about Notre Dame, so you can join Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier for the Tuesday Notre Dame preview show. Tell your friends, gather them around the virtual campfire. We'll see you Tuesday to take on the Fighting Irish. Until then, thanks for watching and listening, and fight on.